Okay, hi. For my divergent thinking project, I have researched metacognition and how making mistakes is actually a step towards that metacognitive state. Okay, let's get started. So, throughout this semester, we've talked about what metacognition is, and we already know that it's thinking about our thinking. But what does that actually mean? Isn't there more categories to that? Isn't it deeper than just thinking about your thinking? So reading my articles, I have come up with 4 different definitions. So number 1 is the ability to be aware and know the cognitive process happening in yourself is actually the ability to direct cognitive thinking in yourself. So when you know that you're thinking about this thing, you can direct your thinking in a different way, right? Like a fixed mindset. Number 2, ability of how the instruction done, including the process of thinking, observing, and evaluation. So it is your ability to instruct your thinking, your observing, and your evaluation, right? And it's also how you instruct those things. Number 3, can activate higher level thinking happening in real time. So it helps you solve real-time problems in the real world. Number 5, a skill that is very important in solving mathematical problems. As I know, I am a math major. Metacognition is very important to solving problems. And also math creates metacognition. It's give and take, right? So, what does making mistakes have to do with metacognition? Actually, it has to do with a lot. So, students have this terrible mindset that if they get a mistake wrong in math, that they are dumb or stupid or they're just not good at math. That is so wrong. That's very, very wrong. Our unconscious is actually working, and our unconscious is a beautiful thing, but it's working and it's screaming at you because you did something wrong. You made a mistake, and it's screaming at us to go back and correct it. And it just we have to connect our unconscious and conscious brain. Metacognition, as we have defined, is thinking about thinking. Mistakes are just a step in the staircase of obtaining metacognition, hence the staircase. But if you understand your mistakes, you understand your thinking and will know to go back to a problem when you make that mistake. And double check your answers, right? So can we change our view on mistakes, especially math mistakes? Well, in China, the teachers value mistakes, and students are proud to demonstrate their mistakes, to show the class their mistakes. It is just whether or not we can change that attitude in our own classrooms. Okay, so next is how the brain sees mistakes. So when students, there's actually some neuroscience behind this. When students make mistakes in math, they grow a new synapses. So, synapses. So they don't have to even go back and fix it. When they make a mistake, they grow a new connection, right? So the brain responds to mistakes in 2 different ways. You have your ERN, the method. The ERN response. So increased electrical activity when the brain experiences conflict between a correct response and an error. So the ERN occurs whether or not we consciously know that we made a mistake. Okay? And number 2, the PE, a brain signal reflecting conscious attention to mistakes. So when a person is aware that an error has been made and conscious attention is paid to that error, so we know we made that mistake, we go back and we correct it, right? But the ERN is that we don't know that we made it. Both stimulate brain activity. So how can I use this in my classroom? How can I use mistakes in my classroom? Well, according to Jo Baylor, which she wrote mathematical concepts, we can integrate mistakes by 3 different methods, right? Number 1, establish the norm. Welcome and love mistakes, right? Don't just say, oh, I love mistakes, because students aren't going to buy that, right? Especially high school students. They're not going to buy that. We want to establish an environment where students know that they can make mistakes. Because when they make mistakes, they take more risks. When they're comfortable with making mistakes, they start to take risks. We want them to take risks. And it also, if they make a mistake and you say, oh, you know what, it's okay, you know, mistakes are okay. It creates persistence in these students. They want to try again because mistakes are okay. So number 2, don't just praise mistakes, give explanations. This one's pretty self-explanatory, you know. We don't want to say, oh yeah, you made a mistake and move on. We want kids to understand why they made those mistakes so that they can go back and maybe next time that they do a similar problem, they can do it the right way, right? Metacognition. We're on the steps to metacognition. And then 3, give them work that encourages mistakes. We want, if a student is getting everything right, they're probably not challenging themselves, okay? One idea that I've used before is having index cards, right? You pass them up for the warm-up, and then you get students, you get wrong answers, right? And you separate the piles, yes or no, correct or incorrect. And then you take the incorrect and you show it to the class, and you go over, right? It's all anonymous. You go over the mistakes, right? Students will be encouraged to fix these mistakes and to share their mistakes with others, right? We're making a community of learners. Okay, so how I used this in my classroom. I was in an Algebra 2 classroom. Basically, I was teaching a lesson on logarithms. And we went through some problems together. You know, they had a basic understanding of base of change and logarithms. You know, why we use them, what they're for, some earthquake problems in there. So, I presented to the class a more difficult problem, something they hadn't seen every day. So, and I presented to them. Wrote it on the board, and then I asked them to solve the question using their words. Don't show me math, show me words and mathematical terminology along with it. So they wrote it down, you know, la la la. After a period of time, I was like, okay, you can solve it mathematically using symbols and numbers. And I said, okay. When we solved it together, I asked them to go back and explain to me what they did wrong and why. So they wrote it down, and then I asked them to write down how they could do it right next time. And what can you do when you're processing this, when you're processing the math problem? What can you say to yourself to make the problem right? What ways would you do it if you could redo it? Right? And then I had them, you know, do another math problem similarly, and they changed their way of thinking, right? In an article I read, the components of metacognition included awareness, evaluation, and regulation. Awareness, they need to be aware of how they think. Regulation, they need to regulate the way that they think. They can change their way of thinking, right? And the number 3, regulation. I wanted to regulate them, but again, I'm not in the classroom very long or for long periods of time. But the first 2 that we understood, the students understood their way of thinking, and in the second problem, they regulated their way of thinking. They changed their way of thinking from the first problem. And I think those are just steps to metacognition. Making mistakes is okay, and it's something that teachers can obtain if we work really hard. Thank you.